Today, we're excited to kick off a new series of interviews with our management consulted coaches. We'll learn more about their background, journey to MBB, what they've been up to after the firm, and their case coaching philosophy. First on the hot seat is Yusuf Shaikh, an ex-BCGer based out of South Africa. And stay tuned after the interview for our new segment, After Office Hours, where we answer your listener questions. Today we'll answer a listener question about generalist versus specialized consulting roles. I hope you enjoy the discussion. Yusuf, we're so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm excited to be here today and share more with your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, as one of our coaches here at Management Consulted, I'm sure that there's a lot of folks out there that'd like to learn a little bit more about who you are, your background, experience, your take on the case interview process. So let's dive in. Let's dive in with some personal questions to get to know you a little bit better. We'll start off with a random question. Yusuf, who is one person from history that you would love to get dinner with?
Sure. Thanks so much for that question. So it's an interesting one, and I had a good think through it before answering it or deciding what my answer would be here. And not to be too cliched, but it's actually a former Bainey. His name is Hamilton Helmer, and he's an author of probably one of the best books in business strategy and just business as a whole, and it's called 7 Powers. Now, the reason I'd want to have dinner with him is for 2 reasons. One, he has an extremely interesting history about how he actually joined Bain. He actually had a major or a PhD that was outside of business, and he was interviewing to get into a management consulting firm. It piqued his interest for various reasons, and he actually interviewed directly with Bill Bain. Now, he was up against a whole lot of MBA candidates, and was really concerned that he wasn't coming from an Ivy League business school. So at the end of his interview, he told Bill Bain, I'm worried about whether or not I'd get in, and I'm worried about not having an MBA. And Bill Bain's response was, well, neither do I. So for me, that was an interesting one. And apart from that, he's written, as I mentioned, the brilliant book 7 Powers, and it's really one of the best books that takes you through a lot of the strategic elements that are important when you're helping build and advise a business that expects to exist into the future and continues to endure. So highly recommend that book as well.
Oh, I love that. I'm not familiar with that book. I'm going to have to take a look. And even more so, it is interesting since you are not an ex-Bainey, right? You are an ex-BCGer, and we'll hear more about your pathway to that firm a little bit later. But one other personal question I wanted to ask you, and I can hear a little bit of it in your voice. So you've spent some time in South Africa. Would love to hear a little bit more about that and your favorite part of living there.
Sure. So I'm actually 100% born and bred in South Africa. So I have a little bit of that, or I guess I have a lot of that South African accent. As I'd hope most South Africans would probably say, even most of those who've immigrated for various reasons, there's a lot to love about South Africa. So I guess I'd distill it into one element, and that's the people. South Africa has a brilliant culture of coming together, especially in adversity. And there's probably the best way to see this is whenever there's something crazy or terrible going on in our country, you can just log on to social media or Twitter, look at the trending hashtags, and just see how South Africans just make absolute fun of the worst situations. And that's really a function of the culture of coming together, being supported irrespective of the history we've had in South Africa, coming through into democracy in the 90s, that, people love to come together in our country, and that filters through to every part of life, whether it's work and different cultures coming together. You can imagine a BCG, especially where you have South Africans, you have people from outside of South Africa, and you have case teams with people from different backgrounds all coming together and just enjoying a really great culture. So yeah, it's the people that make South Africa really special.
Are you still located there? And what are you doing these days?
Yeah, I am still in South Africa, so I've actually moved around. I was born and grew up on the eastern part of South Africa, close to the East Coast. I then studied at university on the West Coast in Cape Town, at the University of Cape Town, and then moved up to BCG that was headquartered up in Johannesburg, the northern part of the country. Spent some time at BCG. I'm now actually working with South Africa's leading FinTech payments company called Yoko, and I advise them on two key things. One is directly business strategy and corporate strategy, and second, linking to a different part of my career, which is corporate development and M&A. So advising them on the next big venture that we should go into within the country as well as beyond South Africa.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about how you got there and the journey and the pathway that you've taken. So let's take a couple of steps back. Before you went to BCG, what's a quick introduction of your background pre-consulting?
Sure. So I was fortunate to enter consulting straight out of university, but there were a few steps before that. I majored in finance and accounting at university. I interned both at an auditing firm, and I was initially on the path towards becoming a chartered accountant, but through an internship decided that wasn't for me, and also went through various programs for investment banking. But once I learned more about consulting, realized that would actually be my niche, and was fortunate enough to first intern at BCG. And following that, I then received a full-time offer to join the BCG Johannesburg office as a junior associate.
So you broke in as an intern. What can you extract some insights for those looking at a similar pathway and wanting to break into a top firm? What can they do to set themselves apart?
So there's two important elements, and I really underscore this when I run through candidate preparation interviews. The first is, and I almost like to describe it this way, is that cracking the case is almost like just getting through the door, right? So that is almost, and I guess the way talent is in the world, and the competitiveness around getting into top tier consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, is that cracking the case is really just the bare minimum. Really, what gets you the job is a little bit that comes out of the case interview, but it's actually more around what happens around that case interview, some of the questions before and after. So step one is you have to crack the case and be really good at that. And that's what management consultant helps you do as a listener. The second part of it is how you're able to draw on personal experiences, especially if you're a grad who's interviewing, but also past professional experiences if you're an experienced hire, to show how you are able to approach problems in the world, whether it's business related or even maybe personal in nature. Combine that thinking as well as working with people to be able to solve a problem. And maybe I'll give an example, and I'll give an example actually from someone that I interviewed. So I always try to tell candidates that when you're interviewing, there needs to be something about you that when the partner at the firm concludes the interview, that he must be able to quickly remember you and be like, he's that guy. So for example, I was the FinTech app guy. In my final interview with a BCG partner, and he was actually from the Netherlands, we probably spent the bare minimum. We spent about 15, 20 minutes on the case, and we actually spent a lot more time chatting about an idea that I had to build an app to help people in lower income segments, so your lower LSM groups, save money very easily. And it was an idea that I had at university, that you almost have this little wallet, almost the same as getting scratch cards for airtime on your phone. You almost load up this wallet, and from there you can buy really simple and easy to understand investments like retail government bonds, as a way to make it, to open up access to investments. And that's really what we chatted about. What was the problem? And almost, showing off a little bit of your structure through there. And I like to use the STAR framework. So we ended up chatting a lot about that. And I'd hope that by the end of that interview, that he'd remember that, me as the app guy or the guy who thought about that. And fair enough, when I did get the internship offer and, I asked for some feedback, I got, constructive feedback. And one of the items were he liked the innovation and that entrepreneurial flair that I brought. But by way of example, with some candidates, I've coached a doctor who told me a fantastic story about some of the challenges he faced when helping a woman give birth. Another story is a former army vet. So there's different experiences that you can draw on and showcase that and find a way to incorporate that into an interview. The part of that element, as well as maybe you don't have the most exciting story that you could share, but there's something that you can show off, and it's sort of limited and unique to this time, is that we've just gone through this, or we are in some aspects going through this period of COVID. And COVID has disrupted businesses in many aspects. And a lot of the case interviews, especially if you take from case interview books, they're based on business as usual and how you'd usually crack business problems under usual circumstances. But with COVID, it actually introduces additional levels of complexity. And if you're smart about it in an interview, you actually can start bringing what you've experienced through COVID into that problem-solving process and showing off that skill. A simple example is if you're building out a problem, for example, you advising on whether to enter a new market, and you produce your product in country X, and you now want to export to country Y. An important consideration would be the increasing cost of shipping that's almost skyrocketed and gone up tenfold since the start of the pandemic, which is a significant difference and a significant incremental cost versus pre-COVID, and something that isn't usually built into your typical consulting case books. So yeah, in I guess a little bit of a longer version, set yourself apart through your business problem-solving process.
Absolutely. I love how you talked through there's no one perfect profile for someone to get into these firms, and that it's not only about the case interview itself. Now, as someone who, is from South Africa, recruited and worked in South Africa, but now has coached people from all over the world and worked at a global firm as BCG. What's your perspective on the nature of the interview process? And what I mean by that is it really different in South Africa versus Europe versus the US, or is it pretty much the same process if you're interviewing for a global firm? So I'd say it's fundamentally the same process. And the reason why is, I guess in South Africa, there's a little bit of a hack. I was fortunate enough to interview with Bain, McKinsey, and BCG. And most of the time, the people who interviewed me, actually, I'd say 90% of the time, people were not from South Africa. They were actually consultants, principals, partners from offices outside of South Africa, from as far as the East. So my part of my 2 final round interviews, one of them was with a partner from Japan, to Amsterdam, Netherlands, Ivory Coast, London. So I'm just thinking through some of the people that interviewed me, but really these people are from all over the world. But the process fundamentally is the same. What I like to tell people is that sometimes the specific consulting firm differs in where their niche areas are. And sometimes the office itself specializes in a specific niche area. So for example, a Bain London office would be considered to be a specialist in the private equity industry. So you might see that the people who might interview you there would have a case more focused towards that specific industry. But at the end of the day, that really is dependent on the specific consultant or partner. And I'd say, the people generally like to, or the people who interview generally like to draw on their own consulting experience to build out a case interview for candidates. Really appreciate your perspective on that. Global firms use a global process, but you do have to dive in and understand the lines of business of that particular firm, the specialty areas of that office, et cetera. So That's great. Thank you for sharing your perspective there. Now let's look back and think about your time at BCG. Could you describe for our listeners what's a typical day in the life of a consultant?
Sure. So I was at BCG pre-pandemic, so this might have changed a little bit, but I do keep up with a few colleagues, and I think from a meeting standpoint, it's probably a little bit different. But a typical day in the life of a consultant usually starts out with a daily stand-up early in the morning with your case team, usually at the client site. Mm-hmm. This is where consultants as well as client counterparts from various different work streams come together to discuss. Usually it's progress made from the previous day, action items or priorities for today or the week going forward, and any roadblocks or issues that any one work stream or one consultant might have that they might need support from someone else. And usually you discuss things that are on pause or on hold for now. You then proceed into what are usually working side by side with the client counterpart, and this involves various things. Things like working side by side to pull data. So sometimes it's data collection, sometimes it's data analysis. Sometimes you've prepared work from the previous day and you're validating this with the client counterpart, and running through various analysis and frameworks and that sort of thing to help gain the buy-in from your client through this business problem-solving process. So it really is gathering information from your client and using that very valuable time with your client, who is the very important party in these cases, to build out a solution that will really be impactful and will be lasting. You then usually take that information, package it up, write up your notes, usually send summary emails for whatever calls that you've had, and that's usually a big role of the consultants, is making sure that you're very detail orientated when asking the right questions and trying to get to the right answers, and packaging it up in a way that's easy to understand. You then, around the end of the day, around 4 or 5 p.m., pack up and then head over back to the office, if you're working in the same city as the office, or back to your hotel. You then usually break for dinner, and then meet up again after dinner to discuss outcomes from some of the calls earlier in the day, some of the emails or the data that you've packaged, and discuss some of the next steps. This would usually involve some deliverables which may be due that evening. So consultants are known for working a little bit into the evening. Case dependent. If you're able to wrap up your day at the case a bit earlier in the day, then you head back a bit earlier to the office and finish up earlier. But sometimes, and most times, it actually happens a bit late in the day. But yeah, that's when you package up some work. You usually share it internally that evening. It gets reviewed the next morning, and this is typical for a lot of managers. They usually like to have their mornings clear, to get some time to review your work, pass in some comments. Usually this passes up the chain towards the partner, and you sort of have to wait the next morning for the partner feedback. That information comes back to you the next day, and you sort of package it and incorporate that into your next day of analysis and slide writing. A typical day and the accumulation of days usually culminates into a few key steering committee meetings, and this is usually the peak of your consulting cases, when all your consulting insights are now packaged. It's now presented to a key group of people, usually from the consultant side as well as the client side, and that's the big day where you either hear the go ahead and full alignment, or back to the drawing board. Sometimes it's dependent.
Yeah. There's always something else coming, right? And that project cycle, once you've done it a few times, you can get the sense of the way that it ebbs and flows over time. But in what you just talked through, I heard a lot of collaboration across the team, a lot of ever-changing work, dynamic days, some long days. So, thank you for sharing about that from your perspective at BCG. Now let's think about what made you leave the firm. Why did you decide that it was time to move on? What did you move on to? And how did your consulting skills help you succeed there?
We'll be right back after this quick message. Would you like to receive direct mentorship and prep support from a former McKinsey, Bain, or BCG consultant like the one you're hearing from today? Well, with Black Belt, our flagship consulting prep program, you can. In Black Belt, you receive 8 or more one-on-one coaching sessions with the coach of your choosing. They'll work with you in a structured way to help you prepare for interviews and land that coveted consulting offer. In addition, you also receive lifetime access to the entirety of our digital consulting prep materials, including but not limited to 9 courses, 500 plus practice cases with solutions, hundreds of practice drills including mental math, structure drills, market sizing, 4 intensives, and much more. Plus, our support team will be on standby to answer your questions and provide guidance wherever needed along your journey. If you're tired of wasting time in your interview prep process, Black Belt is for you. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and to purchase today.
Sure. So I was actually very fortunate to have really good managers at BCG. And something that I really pride myself in is building networks around me. And I think that's probably one of the very important skill sets and opportunities that you have as a consultant, is building a very strong network of highly skilled, top achievers, people who are almost the best in their game, whether it's on the consultant side and you get specialists in specific domain areas or even specialists even in industry. So I built a really good network while at BCG, and very early on, I had managers who trusted me and believed in me and coached me through this. And towards the end of the year, actually, I was working through cases that I guess I wasn't necessarily enjoying. I think consulting has its space for people in their career. Some people set specific targets for how long they want to stay in consulting. Some people want to be in consulting for life. They just love the elements that go into it. But I always sort of had a timeline in mind, and considered that, considering that I came from a background in finance, really started becoming interested in the world of investing. And that really peaked when I worked on a private equity due diligence. And post that case, I was discussing, with my manager, it would be awesome to be able to get into industry. And it was an opportune time when his fellow classmate from Duke, actually, had started a private equity firm a few years before and was actually hiring. So my manager was a BCG, Duke MBA. His colleague was also Duke MBA, but a former Bainey. But nevertheless, they still remain friends. And he recommended, hey, if you're keen to get into industry, maybe this is something you should just chat to my friend about. Might be something that you're keen on, maybe not now, maybe even in the future. So I decided, why not keen to have the exploratory call, and maybe it's something I can further sink my teeth into. And from there, it was actually, I got on with my later bosses like a house on fire. We both had this consulting skill set and this way of communicating. But this prospective company and future colleague would describe a very innovative model for private equity in Africa that I thought was fantastic, because it leveraged almost a consulting-like framework and applied that along with some capital to small and growing businesses in Africa. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And if you remember back, I spoke a little bit about that entrepreneurial flair and, getting onto the ground and getting operational and helping grow businesses. So I very excitingly took that opportunity. It was a 3-year program, and it was really part of the firm's pilot fund to show that it could bring young people from consulting, pair them up with entrepreneurs who have just started or are beginning to grow their small businesses, and bring the best, the brightest and the best in Africa to work within small and growing businesses that wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford them, using a private equity model. And that was fantastic, because I gained experience to 10 small and growing businesses in various industries within fast-moving consumer goods, agribusiness, and a little bit of tech. build amazing networks, raise a ton of money for these SMEs while helping them grow, and leverage a ton of my consulting skill set to be able to grow them. So let me, go into that a little bit. The most important skill set that I think most people would describe from consulting is actually your ability to communicate. It's a very underrated skill. But communication spans across a few things. It could maybe just start with how you write an email. And I remember this from my BCG training is you can actually use the pyramid principle or the SCQ framework, situation, complication, key question, even in an email. So it starts even from the way you write an email to the way that you send out a calendar invite, believe it or not. And it then lives within the way you analyze and solve problems. And there's a term that I love and I appreciate it more and more every day, and that's something called MISI, being mutually exclusive and completely exhaustive. And that really is about when you're trying to understand an issue, making sure that you understand it from all relevant angles. So it's a few frameworks and a few skills. So skills like, being able to take a very structured approach to solve problem solving, being able to communicate for results, and pairing that up with you're really going deep into a problem and analyzing it. And when you have an SME that's struggling to allocate its time between should I be building out my admin function or should I be focusing on sales and business development? Well, when you're an SME and you're really just fighting to live for the next day, well, it's a very clear priority. If you think of the BCG 2x2 matrix, size of the prize and effort required, well, sales sits up at the top right quadrant. So I was very fortunate to be able to bring those skill set into SMEs. Yeah, and I guess then to round that up, once I completed the 3-year what is called the Operator Investor program, I then saw an opportunity to join South Africa's leading FinTech payments company called Yoko. They were recruiting for a really interesting role, really looking also for former MBB consultants to help build out a corporate strategy and corporate development function within the company. And it really brought back a lot of the, having joined, it brought back a lot of the memories back from consulting, because we really went back to almost consulting and corporate strategy 101 to build out a corporate strategy to a well-funded. And then now, working on expanding the company, really looking at corporate development and M&A and borrowing a lot from my previous role as an operator investor to really assess the right opportunities and find the right opportunities to acquire and, really assess that build or buy strategy for the company.
Mm-hmm. So many things I love about what you shared there, Yusuf. The point about communication, pyramid principle, MISI, and the utilization of other frameworks and strategic problem solving. A little shout out to Duke Fuqua. Love it. Yeah. I teach there at the business school. So, and I have a Duke MBA as well. Love it.
Wow.
And it's and to hear your journey, not only that first step out of consulting, but then how you were able to kind of use that as an additional launching pad and continue to move your career forward. For those who are already thinking, maybe I want to get into consulting and then perhaps I want to do some type of work in finance after that. Any advice that you have for folks that are already thinking they may want to transition into finance? I know you already spoke about networking, but anything else there about how they can set themselves up for success?
Yeah, so there's a reason why if you look at most roles that involve anything around corporate strategy, M&A, investment banking, when you look at these job spec, they usually have two requirements, formal consulting or formal investment banking, right? Why is that? Well, it's actually because of the training that you get in those environments. So my advice is, apart from the networks, you really need to make the most of what you're being trained to do, right? So we mentioned, a few of those frameworks around pyramid principle, communicating for results, being MISI. But really what it comes down to is being able to apply a very structured and logical process when you're trying to address a problem. Now, When you think about the world of finance, it comes down to resource allocation, right? Where should I be allocating, limited financial resources to be able to, maximize shareholder or stakeholder return? Sometimes it comes in the form of, should we be acquiring something? Should we be merging? Should we be raising, additional capital, whatever it may be? But the cap that you have on isn't necessarily focused on a single domain. So it's not necessarily just focused on digging through data and trying to find some data. It isn't just packaging that data and presenting it in front of people. It isn't just getting buy-in from different stakeholders. It's actually all of the above. And a career in consulting and sometimes, investment banking and sometimes both, those careers exercise the part of your brain that help you do all of those things. Collecting data, synthesizing it, packaging it, presenting it and getting the buy-in of people. And that's a very unique skill set that, I guess for good or bad, is only really taught and developed in consulting firms or in investment banks. And because it's such a unique place, because you're doing this, you're not just doing it for anyone, you're doing it for the biggest companies in the world, for some of the most successful CEOs in the world. Those are the people you're advising, those are the people you're presenting to and preparing all of these presentations, which is why consultants have to be so meticulous and detail-oriented and MECE and, all of that, because you're preparing these things for people who have really important jobs and have to make really important decisions. It's for that reason that they trust that advice, and it's that skill set that becomes very important to develop if you want to then go into the world of finance or investing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love those recommendations. Lean into the training, really absorb it, apply it while you're at one of these firms being a consultant, because that's what's going to be expected of you as you move on. So in addition to your current work in FinTech, you are a coach with us here at Management Consulted. And as such, you help clients prepare for interviews at the world's top consulting firms. What's the process that you run your clients through to prepare?
Okay, so I first like to understand the client's context, right? So what program are they applying for, whether it's the internship or the full-time role, as well as whether they're interviewing for perhaps a graduate position or an experienced role or an MBA consultant role. This really develops the baseline of what's going to be expected from you when you go into that case interview. From there, it's then assessing where you are in terms of your case interview preparation. So here, it's understanding, where the client is in terms of the number of reps that they've been through. So one, how many cases have you been through? What have you really practiced? Are these more on the qualitative or quantitative side? And really from here, what I'm trying to understand is, do you have practice? If you do have practice, where are your weak areas? Where would you like to improve on? And two, if you haven't done that many cases, well, now we're going to be building up that baseline and really assessing what you need to be focusing on, what you're good at, what you might be struggling with, and what you might have to improve along the way. Parallel to that, it's also getting an understanding of how comfortable the client is with two things: their resume or their CV, as well as their cover letter, because both of these elements inform what happens, before and after the case. So usually, like running through the client's resume, seeing how well they're able to communicate it in a structured way, because speaking to your resume isn't about going through each of your positions; it's actually about telling a story. And if you're able to do that with your CV, actually are showing off some good skills to the partner that you're interviewing with. And similarly with your cover letter, and that's an experience for someone to then double click into specific experiences, which is what I usually do as well in that process. But keep that on the side. Let's come back to the case interview. So once we have a baseline understanding of where the client is, we then I have a set of cases that I usually work through that address different things. One, they're across a spectrum of difficulty, and two, they're across a spectrum of qualitative and quantitative, both incorporating core things like being able to develop a framework, or understand the key facts, develop a framework, go into 1, 2, 3 levels of insights and of detail when presenting solutions to a case. So it's really about picking the right case for the candidate at that level. And then throughout the different coaching sessions, establishing what the areas for development are, incorporating that into the next case that they're working on, and then along the way doing two things: developing their case interview strength, and at the same time building up the candidate's confidence. And the reason why I incorporate this very important element of confidence into the case interview preparation process is that when you're interviewing for a consulting firm, one, you're being tested for your case interview skills, but two, you're also being tested that if you're taken and within a month or two put into the situation where you are now in a live case with a client and now presenting a recommendation, well, even if you have the right answer, it isn't necessarily about that. If you're presenting that answer with doubt and you aren't confident in your ability to communicate and to convince people, well, the client is not going to trust it, no matter how rigorous and robust your analysis is. So the interviewer really wants to see how confident are you that even if you may stumble upon pieces of data or insights here and there, how confident are you in your ability to present and how much conviction do you have in it? And that's an important element that, through this process, I like to build with clients.
Oh, absolutely. I love how you talked through those extra elements of resume review, behavioral interview prep, confidence, executive presence. These things are all part of the package of what the firms are looking for. Absolutely. Piggybacking off of that a little bit, in your experience, what are one or two qualities that most successful candidates possess?
Yeah, so I guess coming back to what I mentioned, the qualities that candidates present is really being confident throughout the process. Now, this must not be confused for arrogance. It really is when you walk into that interview room or when you dial into that Zoom call, it's having the confidence to not be overwhelmed by who the person interviewing you may be. So this might be a partner, might be a well-known partner, it might be on TV or, whatever it might be. But it really is, sitting up straight and being confident, smiling, usually engaging in some chit chat and showing that you're not just there to show how well you can case. You're actually there to meet someone, to get to know them better and see whether you want to work with them for the next couple of years. So that's the one very important quality. I guess the second very important quality is being able to solve a problem with a little bit of humility. And the reason why I say that is there's a phrase that we used to use at BCG when we often thought about recruitment. I supported with quite a few programs around recruitment, and we tried to synthesize what is the character or the person that we're looking for, and we came down to humble overachievers. And yeah, for whatever connotation it may have, it really did come down to that. Is this person smart and confident and able to do that? But are they able to do that in a humble way? And probably one of the best ways to show that humility is saying, hey, this is the recommendation I have, but subject to validation of some more inputs, or communication or socializing whatever these recommendations are with the rest of the client side, or maybe even passing this up to some expert at BCG and getting their expert input into this. That's also a very key character that people or that consultants look for. And sometimes it's also even the small things like if you're walking into a room and you see the partner on a call, just knocking on the door and giving him that minute to take his call before walking. And if he receives a call saying, hey, if you need to take a minute, take your call. It's showing that you're not just worried about yourself in your own interview. If something else comes up, you're willing to be accommodating.
Humble, considerate, overachiever. I really like that. I'm going to use that classification moving forward. Yusuf, we really appreciate you taking the time to share more about yourself, your journey, what you do here at MC. How can people work with you?
So the best and the easiest way is to reach out via the management consultant platform. So when you're ready to get started with training, feel free to book a session with me on the platform. I'm usually available Wednesdays and Sundays, depending on where you are in the world. For me in South Africa, it's usually in the afternoons and evenings. So you can reach out to me directly via the platform.
Perfect. Yusuf, thanks again for your time.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, and have a great day further.
Welcome to After Office Hours, the part of the show where we take and answer your questions. Don't forget to send in your question. You can record a quick 30 to 60 second voice note on your phone and email it to podcast@managementconsulted.com. We're very excited for this. Today's question comes from Dylan in New Jersey. And to answer it is Naman, our COO. Naman, how you doing?
Fantastic. I'm ready to see if Dylan can stump us today.
Well, here is the question.
Hi, my name is Dylan Mohan. I'm currently located in New Jersey, and my question is, I've been searching for open positions on some of the bigger firms' websites, and I can't find just a general management consulting job. I was wondering if you could break down some of these subdivisions, such as human capital, technology, deals advisory, and snowballing off that, are there some smaller firms that do offer just a general management consulting job where you're exposed to a lot of different functions working for your clients? Thank you.
Dylan, that's a great question. The world of consulting can be a black box, especially if you're relying on firm websites to give you all the information that you need. They are notoriously clunky, confusing, and not meaty, surprisingly, considering that's the way that you should approach a consulting project. Let's see if we can bring some clarity to your job search. So number one, there are firms out there that offer generalist roles. This means that you are working on projects across industries for different types of clients, solving different types of business problems. Most of the larger firms that you've been looking for jobs at actually offer generalist roles. So MBB, Big Four, firms like Accenture Strategy, LEK, Oliver Wyman, all of these firms and more offer generalist roles. Now, as you've alluded to, there are also consulting firms, some of the same consulting firms I just mentioned, that also offer industry-specific or function-specific roles as well. So you're right, human capital practice areas that deal a lot with compensation and benefits packages, change management, post-merger integration specifically when it comes to teams and people. Supply chain functions that of course deal with supply chain and procurement. Technology practice areas that deal either with technology strategy, aka what type of technology will help us solve this problem, or technology implementation, actually being embedded in the client organization, helping them roll out a particular solution. How do you figure out what type of consulting is right for you? Number one, network. Talk to people inside of the specific firms and practice areas that you're interested in potentially joining. Ask them personal, specific, and positive questions. What do I mean by that? Don't ask them questions about the firm or life on the job that you can figure out by reading our website or the firm websites. Ask them specifically about what their day-to-day on the job looks like, about the projects that they've been staffed on, about the number of industries that they've been able to serve in the last X years that they've been working at the firm. So number one, make sure to network. Number two, leverage our consulting firm directory and our consulting firm profiles to get an insider look at the firms. We break down the differing levels of compensation that each practice area and firm offers. So make sure you take advantage of those free resources at Management Consulted. Dylan, let me leave you with this. The best way to identify open generalist roles at the firms that you're targeting is not through searching online. It's through networking. Here's what you want to do. You want to target people in the role that you're applying for inside of your target offices and speak to them. We have incredible resources on identifying the right people to talk to and how to reach out to them. We've included them in the show notes. But if you blindly apply online, you can expect to be dazed, confused, and frustrated. And even when you do apply for an open role, the chances are low that you'll receive a response just through applying online. So in the discovery process and the pre-application process, you want to make sure that you're networking to identify open roles inside of your target practice areas and offices, and to ensure that when you do apply, your application is flagged for further review. Best of luck, and don't hesitate to follow up with further questions.
Thanks, Naman, and thanks, Dylan, for submitting that question. Well, there you have it, folks. Remember, you can send in your own questions to our email. That's podcast@managementconsultant.com. And we'll catch you next week for another question.
Want to work directly with Yusuf? Check out his coaching calendar in the link below. All of our coaches are ex-McKinsey, Bain, or BCG consultants and interviewers who've been extensively vetted and only coach with us here at Management Consultant. They love working with prospective candidates to mock through full interviews or drill in areas you need extra help. You can find a link in the show notes or read more about our offerings at managementconsultant.com.